Mr. Vice President, great to see you.
Great to see you too, Sean.
Okay, so you're in my neighborhood. You're doing a fundraiser for New York gubernatorial hopeful,
Lee Zeldin.
Welcome to this part of America where you want to get away as fast as you can because taxes are insane in New York State. Glad you're here.
It's great to be here, Sean. Thanks for having me.
You know, these are troubling times. Let's start with our own government is saying they anticipate that a Russian full-on attack of Ukraine is imminent within any hour. It could happen, certainly, they think, within the next 48 hours. Your reaction to that?
Well, I just must tell you that to see the way the Biden administration has handled Ukraine is a testament to a historic truth, that weakness arouses evil. I mean, this is an administration from very early on approved the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, literally, virtually a gift to Russia, reopened negotiations over the Iran nuclear deal. And then the disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan, I think, has created the conditions that emboldened our adversaries around the world, including Putin and Russia, to do exactly what they're doing today. But I must tell you, the lack of a strong American response, which would not include military troops, but it would include, redoubling our efforts to make sure that Ukraine has the ability to defend itself by itself, continuing to ship arms at record pace, to have punitive sanctions before the fact of a Russian invasion, which, as we know, has already begun. I think is a testament to the fact that that the world has judged the leadership of the Biden administration and found it wanting, and now more than ever, we need to send a clear message of American strength.
We say that, okay. Now, the Trump-Pence administration did not grant the waiver for the pipeline. Now, Joe Biden did grant that waiver. They have since today announced sanctions against Nord Stream 2, okay, a reversal back to your policy. But I think there's another huge factor in all of this, and that is, I think one of the greatest accomplishments of the Trump-Pence administration was, for the first time in 75 years, America was energy independent, and you left office leaving America as a net exporter of energy. How big a factor is that in all of this?
Well, it was no accident that Russia did not attempt to redraw territorial lines in Europe by force under our administration.
But this why not? Why didn't they do it in...
Well, in 2008, when the Bush administration was in office, they went into Georgia. In 2014, they took Crimea when Joe Biden was Vice President of the United States. Under our administration, we came in, and the first thing we did was rebuild our military. We restored the arsenal of democracy. We made a commitment to defend our nation and to stand with our allies around the world. We sent a deafening message of American strength, and peace comes through strength. But it wasn't just that. It was when Russia's ally Syria used chemical weapons on innocent civilians. President Trump ordered 58 cruise missiles in when the last administration had allowed them to cross that so-called red line and did nothing. And then where we took down ISIS and Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, we took out Qasem Soleimani. What Russia saw, what China saw under the Trump-Pence administration was American strength, a commitment to defend our nation, and a willingness to use force to prosecute our interests around the world. And I just must tell you that, again, that combination of capitulation to Iran, reopening the Iran nuclear deal, capitulation on the Nord Stream 2 agreement, we had put the sanctions in place because President Trump said early on, we're going to call on our NATO allies to live up to their commitments to our common defense, and we are going to oppose efforts for Germany and Europe to become dependent on Russia for more natural gas. We put those sanctions into place, and one step after another, it was that communication of American strength that I think held Russia at bay. But it's been the signals of weakness, and most especially the disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan that I think has emboldened our adversaries, it's emboldened Putin, and the only response is American strength.
No, I would imagine President Xi is watching as well. He has spoken at length about, quote, reunification, his term, with Taiwan. That's not reunification. And he's been very aggressive, taking over Taiwan airspace, flying his fighter jets over them. He's cracked down in Hong Kong, COVID-19, the Uyghur minorities. There's been no significant response. If you were to tell Joe Biden tonight what would be the position of strength at this moment with Vladimir Putin, on the verge of invading Ukraine, how does he stop it at this late hour? It seems that the ship may have sailed.
Well, first, let's be clear. My view is with Russian military in the so-called separatist regions, they've already invaded Ukraine.
Agreed.
But the way to stop them, and more importantly, to get them to withdraw, I think, is threefold. Number one, we need to continue to arm Ukraine. Now, they're not a NATO ally. We don't have a mutual defense obligation. But we ought to be shipping more and more armaments, anti-tank missiles. Remember, under the Obama-Biden administration, they sent blankets and military meals. When our administration took office, we sent armaments to Ukraine to be able to defend themselves. We ought to be doing that, redoubling those efforts. Secondly, this initial round of sanctions, weak as it is not enough to stop Putin's ambitions to redraw territorial lines in Europe by force. What we ought to do is we ought to sanction every financial institution in Russia until the Russian military fully withdraws from Ukraine. Remember, our economy is roughly 15 times larger than Russia's economy. We're the most powerful economy in the history of the world. And to impose sanctions on financial institutions, to cut them out of the monetary system where the American dollar is used, is literally to cut them out of commerce around the world. And so I believe we ought to be putting strong economic sanctions. We ought to be arming Ukraine in a very real sense. And lastly, we ought to be moving resources through NATO to our NATO allies in the region, because my concern, as Putin moves across the landscape in Ukraine with ambitions that I think go well beyond these so-called separatist areas, that it likely won't stop there.
You think they want the whole country?
Well, look, in our first year,
the Baltic states in play? Because
in our first year in office, Russia was amassing troops along the border of Eastern Europe in what was to be the largest military exercise since the end of the Cold War. So our administration sent me to Estonia, and I met with the leaders of Estonia and Latvia and Lithuania just to fly the flag with our NATO allies and make sure Russia knew that we intend to keep our commitments to our common defense. A few months later, I traveled to Montenegro, where Russian agents had attempted to assassinate a head of state and had involved themselves in trying to manipulate Montenegro as they were moving toward joining NATO. So, the reality is that we ought to be arming Ukraine, making sure that they can defend themselves. We ought to be bringing economic pressure on Russia through the strength of our economy and sanctions. But beyond all of that, we also ought to be shoring up our commitment to provide for the common defense to all of our NATO allies in and around the region.
Do you have any doubt Taiwan is next and that China will go after their territorial ambitions?
Sean, I was just on the Korean Peninsula and heard that just in recent weeks, China had sent the second largest aerial armada across the Taiwan Straits than ever before. And the largest was just a few months earlier. The reality is China is continuing to act in a menacing and a threatening way toward Taiwan. North Korea actually fired 7 missiles during the month of January alone. So again, I say what I said at the beginning. Weakness arouses evil. And whether it be North Korea back to firing missiles, whether it be the military provocations of China in the Taiwan Straits or the South China Sea, whether it be the Russian military now moving across the border, moving into Ukraine. We're learning once again the lesson of history that the free world is secure when America is strong, and the world understands that we are willing to use that strength to defend our interests around the world.